The silverware clinked gently, the only real rhythm at our dinner table these days. I'd made lemon thyme chicken, Karis's favorite growing up, but she barely touched it, too busy scrolling through her phone between polite comments to Jonathan's clients from earlier that afternoon. He spoke in that polished tone of his all charm and passive condescension, dropping market jargon like confetti no one asked for. I listened. I always listened. That's what mothers do, even when they feel like a guest in their own dining room. The dishes were cleared, and I returned with a pear tart I had spent the morning preparing, topped with cream steeped in vanilla bean. The smell should have brought comfort. Instead, it floated in the air above a conversation that had gone cold before dessert. Jonathan leaned back in his chair as I set down the plates. "Oh, by the way," he said, with the ease of someone mentioning the weather, "my mother's moving into the upstairs unit next week." I blinked once, then again. My hand stilled on the tablecloth. Karis sipped her wine without looking at me. The crystal glass caught the light just enough to hide her expression. "It just makes sense," she murmured. Jonathan shrugged. "It's just sitting there. She's between places. It's temporary, probably." My chest tightened, but my face didn't move. I nodded slowly, careful not to let the silence stretch too long. "I see," I said, as if this had been discussed, as if I had agreed. They moved on, chatting about remodels and color palettes, as though they'd just swapped out a rug, not redirected the roof over my head. I refilled my water glass and smiled faintly. That's what women like me do when our voices are no longer expected. We keep our hands steady and our breaths even. After they left, I stood at the bottom of the staircase for a long time, staring upward at the door they thought they could assign, like a spare room. Then I walked up the stairs, not to pack anything up, but to make sure the lease agreement was still in place and signed. The upstairs apartment was never just a unit. It was where I breathed freely, where silence wasn't heavy, but sacred. I walked up the stairs slowly that night, letting my hand trail along the banister worn smooth from years of fingertips that once belonged to my husband, my daughter, and me. This space was never for them to give away. It was mine long before they decided it had no value. Inside, the air was warm and still. The bookshelves lined the far wall, each one carved by my husband's hands. Sturdy pine, softened by time and fingerprints. My journals, dating back 4 decades, sat in neat rows. Some filled with pressed petals, others with watercolor sketches of late bloomers from the back garden. I touched the spine of the green one labeled 2002 Alaska Trip, remembering the way Karis used to lean over my shoulder, eager to see each page. Now she couldn't even look me in the eye. I walked to the corner where my orchids rested in dappled light from the west window. "They think you're just decor," I whispered, "but you've been here longer than their marriage." I misted the leaves, gently pinching back a wilted petal from Nerissa. "Yes, I name them. They're more consistent than most people." On the desk sat the lease agreement. I'd reread it twice since Toiver signed it 3 weeks ago. 6-month term. Direct deposit. Quiet hours respected. Rena had looked it over and said, "Ironclad." Not even a cockroach could squeeze through the clauses. I trusted her. I trusted myself. I had felt the shift months ago, the way Jonathan referred to the house as if it were his long-term project, not my legacy. So I acted. Quietly. Without fanfare. I lit a stick of rosemary incense and sat by the window. From here, I could see their car parked below, still warm from dinner, still assuming they controlled the keys to my world. But the key was already spoken for, and in 3 days, the person holding it would be moving in. I first met Toiver Grant on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He wore a charcoal coat, rain streaked across the shoulders, and carried a leather folder with his application neatly typed inside. "I compose music," he said simply. "I need quiet sunlight and walls that don't echo." I liked him immediately. He didn't flinch at my questions. Had lived in artist residencies before? Never missed a payment? References from 2 professors and 1 retired flutist. When I asked why he left his last place, he smiled faintly. Too many opinions. I work best with windows and silence. Rena came by that evening. She read the lease I drafted and made a few notes in red. Add a clause about guest limitations, she said, and cap move-out notice at 30 days just in case. She circled the signature line and nodded. When you're ready, he signs here. This protects you. I was ready. We signed the lease 2 days later in the studio space itself, surrounded by the lingering scent of eucalyptus and varnish. I handed him the keys and moved the rest of my personal items into the lower level. The only things I kept upstairs were the plants, and Toiver didn't mind sharing with them. He paid 6 months in advance. In cash. I don't like owing people, he said. I understood that deeply. From the outside, nothing changed. I didn't advertise the rental. I didn't tell Karis, and certainly not Jonath. But I began locking the interior door at the foot of the stairs each night, and I shifted my gardening schedule to mornings only. I gave Toiver his privacy, and in return, he gave me peace. Jonath had been circling the idea of consolidating space for months. No one's using it, he'd say. It's inefficient. What he meant was it wasn't serving him. So I acted. Quietly. No anger, no confrontation. Just paperwork signatures and a notarized trust. I never expected their announcement to come over creme brulee, but I wasn't caught off guard. I had already moved my world out of their reach. And Magda was about to find that out. She arrived mid-morning unannounced, dragging 2 oversized suitcases that clacked across my stone walkway. A neck pillow hung awkwardly around her shoulders like a crown of entitlement. Magda Marin didn't bother with pleasantries. Jonath said you'd have the key ready, she declared, shifting the weight of her bags against the rail. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and met her gaze without blinking. Did he? I said, mildly stepping aside. The stairs are just there. She gave me a look that might have melted someone younger. Then, without a thank you, she heaved her suitcases up the steps, grunting at each landing as if the house itself were resisting her. I stayed by the front window, watering the begonias. The silence stretched. Then came the voice. Tolliver's calm clipped firm. Can I help you? And then hers, shrill, thrown off. I'm here to move in. This is my son's place. You need to leave. A pause. I live here, Toiver said evenly. Legally. Lease signed. Paid in full. Who are you? I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just plucked a dead leaf from a stem and dropped it into the compost bin. Upstairs, voices tangled. Magda repeated Jonath's name like a passcode that wasn't working. Toiver didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness unnerved her more than shouting ever could. Eventually, I heard the thud of suitcases dragged back down the stairs. The door opened behind me. She says, "This is a mistake," Magda snapped. "You didn't tell us you had someone up there." I turned to her slowly. "You didn't ask," I said. Her mouth opened, then closed. The neck pillow now hung limp at her elbow. She huffed past me and out the door, one suitcase banging against the frame. I didn't offer help. I just returned to my begonias and added a bit more water. The upstairs door closed gently a moment later. Toiver played a soft chord on the piano not long after, and I brewed a fresh pot of tea for the confrontation I knew was coming. He didn't even knock. The door slammed open like an accusation. Jonath stood in the entryway, red-faced and winded, as if righteous anger had fueled the short drive across town. Karis followed behind, quieter, but her expression unreadable. "You blindsided us," he said, voice sharp and echoing through the hallway. "You had someone living up there. Without telling us, I didn't answer right away." I moved to the side table near the kitchen, picked up a folder I'd prepared hours earlier, and handed it to him. A printed copy of the lease sat on top with Tolliver's signature dates, clauses, all of it. You didn't tell us you rented it out, Karis added, softer, but clearly unsettled. I turned to her. You never asked. You assumed. My voice was calm. No edge, no apology. Jonathan's mouth opened to retort, but his eyes scanned the paperwork instead. 6 months. You locked us out of that space for 6 months. It's not your space, I said. The words fell like stones into the room. No one moved. Karis looked down at the folder, then at me. Why didn't you mention anything? Because it's mine, I said, gently but firmly, and I knew you wouldn't like it. That's not fair, she replied. But her tone faltered. We just thought. Yes, I cut in, you thought. But you never asked. You made decisions in your heads and acted like they were facts. Jonathan dropped the folder onto the coffee table. Well, what are we supposed to tell my mother now? That she can't stay. That's exactly what you'll tell her. He looked ready to explode again. But Karis put a hand on his arm. She was looking at me differently now. Not angry, just unsettled. I'll be in touch, Jonathan muttered, already turning toward the door. I'm sure you will, I said, my voice like a quiet bell in a stone room. They left the air behind them, still warm with disbelief. I stood there for a long time, watching the folder where it lay. And then I went to my desk and unlocked the drawer holding the trust papers. Rena stirred her chamomile tea twice before setting the spoon down on the saucer. She never rushed into conversation, something I'd always appreciated. The kitchen was quiet, except for the occasional clink of porcelain and the soft creak of my chair as I shifted. You were right to act when you did, she said finally, glancing at the file folder I'd placed between us. They're showing their hand now. I nodded. The lease was the first shield. The trust was the wall. She leaned in slightly. The LLC is airtight. The upstairs unit is under its name, not yours directly. That means it's separate from the rest of the estate. No one can claim it's part of their future inheritance or push you out. I exhaled slowly. The language in those documents was dry, clinical, but the feeling it gave me was one of quiet safety. Jonathan's been circling, I murmured. Even before this. I heard him once months ago. He asked Karis, why doesn't she just move into one of those retirement places and hand the whole property over? Rena's eyes sharpened. He said that I nodded. She sipped her tea again. They think because you're quiet, you're easy. They've mistaken silence for surrender. I thought back to when Karis was a teenager, how she'd once said, Mom notices everything, she just doesn't say it out loud. It had been said with a laugh. I don't think she meant it as a compliment, but it was true then. And it's truer now. The house, every stair, every shelf, every nick on the floorboards still belonged to me. But for the upstairs, I'd drawn a sharper line. Legal binding, unbreakable. Do you want to send them copies of the trust documents? Rena asked. Not yet, I said, sliding the folder back toward me. Let's wait until they give me a reason. She nodded, understanding perfectly. Later that evening, as I walked past the coat closet, something slipped out of Karis's forgotten folder, tucked behind the door. Blueprints. And a title I hadn't expected to read, Magdas Suite. Karis had stopped by with tulips and the kind of apology that arrives before real regret. She said she wanted to talk, clear the air, maybe even reconnect. I brewed us nettle tea, her old favorite, though she didn't drink much of it. She seemed distracted, eyes flicking to her phone too often, smile a little too fixed. When she left, I didn't notice the folder right away. It was tucked beneath the edge of a dining chair, pale blue, with gold lettering, Magdas Suite, initial drawings. I didn't mean to open it. But the moment I saw my own floor plan, sketched in heavy ink, I couldn't stop myself. The drawings were meticulous. The upstairs wasn't just to house Magda temporarily. No, this was a full conversion. A new private entrance, plumbing rerouted for a kitchenette, and bath structural changes to the northern wall for light optimization. In the corner, I saw Joneth's handwriting. Magda wants bay windows here. I turned the page. There it was. A mortgage refinance proposal, my address, my home, projected value post-renovation circled in red ink. A note, use equity to secure personal line priority pre-approval needed before summer. The paper trembled in my hands, but not from fear. It was anger, slow and ancient, rising from some place I'd long kept buried. They had been planning this long before Magda ever rolled her suitcases up my steps. They weren't just trying to take space. They were carving me out of my own life. No conversation, no inclusion. Just paper trails behind my back. I placed the folder on the kitchen table, sat across from it, and stared at it for a long time. I thought of all the dinners I'd served them beneath this roof. All the stories shared in these rooms. The baby photos in my hall. The hand-painted tiles in the garden path. They wanted all of it. But they didn't want me in it. I stood, steadied my breath, and reached for the drawer where I kept my pen and letterhead. It was time for a different kind of meeting. Over tea and signatures. I made the same tea I always did, cinnamon bark and clove steeped strong. The scent filled the kitchen as the late afternoon light drifted in through the curtains. Everything looked the way it always had. The chipped honey pot. The linen napkins Karis gave me one Christmas. The lemon loaf I sliced with quiet precision. They arrived 10 minutes late. Joneth first postured and cold. Karis behind him, eyes flicking between me and the table, unsure of where to land. I thought we should clear the air, I said, motioning for them to sit. Joneth scoffed. There's not much left to clear, Evalora. You've made your position loud and clear. I didn't respond. I reached for the folder beside the sugar bowl and placed it on the table with both hands. The lease, the trust paperwork, and one more page, simple notarized firm. A formal revocation of any future inheritance tied to this house and its assets. Effective immediately. If you'd like to challenge it, I said softly, Rena's contact information is included. Joneth's face darkened, blotches of red climbing up his neck. Karis's hands stilled over her lap. I trusted you, he hissed. You lied. No, I said gently. You assumed. And you built a plan on top of that assumption without ever speaking to me. Karis swallowed hard. You're cutting us out. You cut me out first, I replied. In blueprints, in bank drafts, in every conversation I wasn't invited to. The room was still. Even the kettle on the stove had gone quiet. Joneth stood shoving his chair back with a screech. This is petty. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. If peace and boundaries are petty, then perhaps I've waited too long to embrace them. Karis lingered a moment longer before following him out, her eyes, full of something I couldn't quite read, loss maybe, or recognition. I cleared the plates in silence, wiped the table clean, and returned the folder to the drawer beside the cutlery. Tomorrow, I would tend to the garden, and perhaps if she came alone, I'd open the gate for Karis. The days settled into a rhythm I hadn't realized I missed. Toiver's piano murmured through the ceiling in the early afternoons, soft as breath. I rose early to tend the garden, my husband's garden, digging my fingers into the soil he once shaped, pruning the vines we planted when Karis was just a child. I kept the gate locked now, not to keep people out, but to protect the calm that had bloomed in their absence. It was a Thursday when I heard the gentle knock. Not the sharp, urgent rap Joneth always used, but a hesitant rhythm that barely reached the doorframe. Karis stood on the porch, alone. No purse, no sunglasses, no folder of plans. Just herself. I don't expect you to make tea, she said quietly. I stepped aside without a word and gestured toward the side path. The garden gate clicked open beneath my key, and we entered together. We walked past the rosemary hedge, past the sunken stone bench where her father once read aloud in the evenings. She slowed near the trellis fingers, brushing a bloom that hadn't yet opened. "You knew the whole time, didn't you?" she finally asked. I nodded. "And you waited for us to show you who we were?" Another nod. "We didn't say much else. We didn't need to." She followed me through the winding beds, pausing at familiar markers, the lavender mound she helped plant. At 14, the cracked bird bath where she once tried to nurse a fledgling. The air was warm, but not stifling the silence between us, soft, not heavy. When we reached the arbor, she turned to me, eyes rimmed with something deeper than just regret. "I was scared," she said, "that you'd never look at me the same." "I never stopped looking at you," I said. She looked down, then smiled faintly, more memory than joy. She didn't stay long. No demands, no explanations. Just a quiet presence walking beside mine. When she left, I locked the gate again. But this time the key felt lighter in my hand. And that night, I lit the porch lamp she always loved as a child. The gate clicked gently behind me as I turned the key. The rosemary hedge had filled in nicely this season, curling against the stone border like it remembered who planted it. I ran my fingers through its silver-green tips and let the scent linger on my skin. Upstairs, Toiver played something slow and deliberate. A minor waltz, maybe. His music had become part of the house, now the same way sunlight filled the staircase, and the sound of the kettle marked the day's rhythm. We didn't speak often, but I liked knowing someone thoughtful lived above me, someone who asked nothing and needed nothing but peace. I watered the orchids before sundown. Nerissa had put out a new bloom, startling violet, edged in ivory. I misted her gently and whispered my thanks. She'd outlived a lot. In my study, the final document sat in a neat file beside the ledgers. The trust was complete. The upstairs unit, the garden parcel, even the heirloom jewelry, all sealed into the foundation of something that could not be picked apart with entitlement or charm. Not anymore. Karis visited now and then, once a month, sometimes less. She never brought Jonath, never mentioned Magda. We'd sit under the arbor and talk about neutral things, the weather, the creeping time, a memory from her childhood that still made her laugh. The rest we left untouched, like a stone in the soil neither of us was ready to dig up. Magda never returned. I wasn't surprised. There was still a spare key tucked beneath the ceramic turtle on the back porch. It wasn't for Karis. Not for Toiver. Not for anyone, really. It was there for me, in case I ever needed to remind myself who the door truly belonged to. They'd tried to claim it with words, with plans, with ink on paper, but none of that mattered anymore. I didn't argue when they tried to take the door because I had already changed the lock.